in the previous lesson we discussed the process of adding candidates and maintaining their master records so that they're in the right position to be selected for jobs, but the searches will work better and that you are only providing candidates that meet the requirements of your customers. The next lesson, or this lesson, is going to focus on onboarding those candidates, and by that we mean taking the candidates through a process of induction, essentially, where we're getting them ready to be allocated to jobs. That process may start with a registration. Maybe we've got to check that they've got the rights to work in Australia. Do we need to do a police check? And then so that when they get through all that process, we've got them in the right shape. So let me just do a bit of a recap about how we might approach onboarding. And we approach onboarding in the Recruit Complete solution using the process of request for information, what we call assessments or requests for information, but also in the context of pipelines. So if you look as an example of what we've got in our test system here, we have recruitment and we have pipelines. And pipelines are, processes. So you can imagine that if this is a process, a pipeline defined as direct onboarding. We have a concept of a published candidate pipeline and unpublished candidate pipeline. I won't talk about vacancy pipelines in this video because this is just a recap, because we do cover building recruitment pipelines and workflows in a separate course. But just to recap, the idea, remember, that we've got a difference. We have a published candidate pipeline, and we have an unpublished candidate pipeline. The published candidate pipeline is the pipeline that candidates will be taken through if they apply for a job that you have published on your careers jobs board. So the process might be somewhat different. So in other words, there's the concept of them applying for a particular job. The unpublished candidate pipeline is where you want to take candidates through a pipeline process for a job that hasn't been published, which specifically means when you're adding candidates manually. But it's not just taking them through. You can also use it where you've created a job, a temporary job, and you want a different process when you accept them into that job. So and again, we cover that in the course on temporary job management. But in this example, in this lesson, we're going to talk about adding our candidates, getting them into the system as we have using the examples in the previous lesson. And then we're going to take them through into a pipeline of this. So in other words, when we add a candidate, we want them to automatically be sent a registration form, a candidate application form. So this is what we call the registration stage of our pipeline. And that candidate application form, and again, I'll just do a bit of a recap, that candidate application form is a completely configurable form for capturing any kind of information. So what we want to do is we want to onboard a candidate, we want to get them into the process, and then we want the process to identify whether they can work in Australia, have they got a vehicle license, have they got references, are they allergic, and essentially you can create any kind of form to capture any kind of data that you want about your candidates as they go through this process. So we want to onboard them and we want to get them into this process. Okay, so we want the process to look after ourselves. We don't want to have to maintain the whole candidate profile. Potentially we can be getting the candidate to take some responsibility for that. But nevertheless, it is a process that will ensure we get compliant. So just recapping again, remember this is your process. Like you can add pipelines in any kind of pipeline group you want. There's no restriction, and you can control what happens in each of the stages. So what we want to do is we're going to do a registration where we're going to send an application form to the candidate to complete. And then we're going to, depending on how they respond to that application, we might do a right to work check by doing an immigration check through an API connection. And then we're going to confirm whether or not they can work with children. So we're going to do another assessment here to confirm that. And then if they get through that stage, we'll do a police check. So we do a police check. There are different models for police checks, but we'll talk about that in another course. reference checks, induction, and then finally that. So in other words, at the completion of the induction phase, we can put this candidate onto any job where they meet the requirements of that job. And we talk about requirements of the job, of course, in another course as well. So we want to get them into a process, and we want the process to look after themselves. So we add the candidate, we want them to get their registration form dynamically. How they're going to get that registration form dynamically is also determined by this. So we know that that registration phase, we're going to send them the candidate. Well, we're not going to send them the candidate application form to complete. What we're going to do is we're going to send them an email. And the email called candidate registration, and that email will contain a link for them to connect and complete their user definable form, which in this case is an application form. So if we look at this, this is the candidate registration email template. So this is the template that's going to go, and they're going to get this, and they're going to be able to click on this link and they'll access the notification directly. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for the moment, what we want to do is talk about the onboarding role, because we want to create a role so that we can attach some candidates to that when we add them, and I'll take you through that process now. So the first thing we do is we go here, add job, add customized job. So now we've got our customized job. We select onboarding role. Our form changes, and then we talk about, well, what is the onboarding role we want to create. So let's assume that we want to have a special onboarding process for a home care worker. So we'll go onboarding, we'll create this onboarding home care worker. Where's the work site? Well, you can pick a work site, and that can come from your organization, but typically you'll put various, because it could be requiring candidates to work in various work sites, but it's really not important for this function. So then who's the owner of this onboarding process? Who's the manager, one-up manager? Now, they can be you can specify people in your business who will do different things or be assigned different tasks based on the workflow you determine. So you can think about that in terms of who you're assigning these owner, manager, and one-up manager tasks to. Having said that, it's only in very specific cases you might use this function. And we cover that separately when we talk in the separate course on creating your assessment templates and pipelines, because that's when it starts to use these. But for the moment, I would simply use put yourself as the owner, manager, and one-up manager. So now we say, what date is this onboarding job? Because maybe we will change the term, the way in which we want to manage the onboarding of a home care worker with a different pipeline. So you can make these jobs date effective, but in a lot of cases it'll be for some time into the future, because really the only thing that will change will be some of the content in the process, and you can override that at the job level anyway. So oops, it's not going to be a very good date, is it? So we'll put it way out to 8th of June 2030 or whatever date we want to. Then finally, what is the pipeline process that we want them to use? So remember, I've just talked about pipelines. Well, we'll just go and do the direct onboarding pipeline. And then you notice then it actually brings in, and you can actually open these cells up, and you can override the specific settings of this pipeline in the context of this job. So I don't want to confuse you, but essentially, if you're just saying use that pipeline stage, save the job, done. But maybe in this situation, you might want to have a different reviewer. Maybe in this situation, you want to have different people assisting. And again, we talk about this detail, but for the moment, it's not important. So just save that, because we'll be talking about it a lot more when we talk about temporary jobs, because overriding pipelines is a real nice feature when you're managing your temporary or permanent jobs. But in this case, for direct onboarding, we simply save the job. So we've now created this onboarding job, and the next stage is to now show you how we can add a candidate and put them into the process.